I'm doing that now. We're going to record this so that if you want to send this to any other members of your staff to see what we talked about today, we can go ahead and have that for you to distribute. And then a reminder here again is there's a question box, and you can go ahead and use that to ask questions or make comments along the way if you want to go ahead and type those as the thoughts come up. Today we're going to start off with some introductions from the EA team and the NWEA team. Then we're going to talk about the continuing 3012C option for the 2 growth models that Education Analytics has provided for about 50 districts along the state over the past 4 years or so. We're going to continue to make those available for folks that need to do the 3012C option that have used us in the past. Then we're going to be talking about the new 3012D approved options that were jointly submitted by NWEA and the EA team together. We have a growth model as well as a student learning objective approach. Then we're going to talk about what we know so far for the logistics for obtaining the results for the upcoming year. We don't know everything yet. There's still a few things up in the air, including how we're going to be obtaining some of the data files that we have typically collected in the past from the RICs, BOCES, and some of the districts, as well as a few other details there. So please bear with us as we're continuing to make sure we get everything in line for that. We'll have more information coming up later. And then there's should be plenty of question and answer time at the end, in addition to a few chances throughout the presentation for anything as I go forward. So to start off, I'll just go ahead and do some introductions so you know who's talking to you here. So there are 2 organizations working together to provide options for using the MAP assessment in APPR plans. First off, there's Education Analytics. That's an organization creating the state-approved growth model and student learning objective approach for APPR using the MAP assessment. So any questions you have about the use of MAP for APPR or specifics of the newly adopted 3012D APPR approaches, or any approaches that EA, our team, has used in the past for the select districts, the 50 or so that have used us for 3012C, you can direct those questions to our team at Education Analytics. And then also there's the Northwest Evaluation Association, NWEA. That's the organization that created the MAP assessment and is working with districts to implement MAP itself. So any questions you have related to the assessment should be directed to NWEA. And today who we have is, we have Sean McLaughlin, that's me, Director of Operations and Communications at EA, and then I have another team member here with me.
Hi, I'm Joe Schubert, one of EA's research analysts working on this project.
And then we also have a representative from NWEA here today. And that's Amanda Towerman. She's here, and can you hear us, Amanda?
Hi, this is Amanda Towerman. I'm the account manager from NWEA.
Excellent. So Amanda's here for any questions you might have about the MAP assessment itself, and if there's any that might need to go to the NWEA research team, those sort of things, she can make sure that those get to the right years, and we can get answers for you on those as well. So our 2 teams have been working together in New York for several years related to 3012C. And since not all the MAP districts in New York have worked with EA before, although I see many familiar names on the list here of folks that have joined us today, we're going to start off with a short introduction to who EA is, and then we'll get into some details of the different solutions we have for 3012C and 3012D. So first of all, what is Education Analytics? We are a nonprofit organization located in Madison, Wisconsin. We're led by Dr. Robert H. Meyer. He is the founder and president of our organization at Education Analytics. He also wears a couple other hats. He's a research professor at UW-Madison in Wisconsin, and he's a professor at La Follette School of Public Affairs. There's a little bit of a screenshot there of our website along with the URL. I don't think you'll be able to click it because it's just a webinar, but if you were to enter that into a browser, you can go ahead and check out our website. It has some information about some of the projects that we have worked on and are working on in the present, as well as in particular some details of the 3012C, in New York, and some previews of 3012D in there as well. We're going to continue to work on updating that website as we learn more about how our solutions are going to work, things like timelines and those sort of things. I'll be referencing the website a few points in time during the webinar today. Again, a little bit more background about EA. just to show some of the places that our team has worked on student growth models in the past. There's actually a few places missing. I should update this map, but we've worked in a number of places, including some of the largest urban districts in the country. And New York there is highlighted as a state because we've been working with those approximately 50 districts over the past 4 years on 3012C options. So starting off talking about the 3012C approach that we are going to continue to be providing for districts that need that. And just to start off, why are we talking about that? So for our understanding is that some or perhaps most of the 50 districts that we've been working with in the past will continue to use the 3012C measures for the upcoming year. So we want to continue to support that. Then for anybody that's new, and I do see a number of unfamiliar names on the list, thank you for joining us today to learn about what we're providing into the future for 3012D. This is an opportunity for you to get a little bit of background about education analytics and our co-build approach to growth measures. You also get some background on how EA is using map data and SIRS data. So the SIRS data usage is an important piece of our approach, meaning the Student Information Repository System. We collect those data as well as part of our metrics that we'll be providing. And then finally, another reason to talk about 3012C is that the approved growth measure for 3012D is a very similar approach to what EA has produced in the past for 3012C. So there'll be a lot of similarities there, although some of the implementation details are still pending. We'll give you a preview of what's the same, what's different, and then also give you some details about logistics, the ones that we know so far. And then for folks that are not familiar with education analytics and our approach, just kind of an idea of where did this come from? Where did the 3012C methodology come from? We co-developed it with an advisory council, and that included folks from school districts across New York that participated with us. Also, NICED and NICET were attending some of the earlier groups that we had getting together, and then education analytics, of course, and then also NWEA was there to add their thoughts. And moving forward, NWEA and EA will continue to solicit feedback and direction from the advisory council and other New York districts, and we'll make adjustments to our current recommendations as needed. So far, we're really trying to honor the decisions that were made so far in the 3012C space and then translate that as necessary to what's required in 3012D. All right, and you know, I should just stop for just a moment. Of course, you can ask questions all along the way, but any kind of broad questions so far before I get into some more details of what we've done in the past for 3012C. All right, I'll continue on. Feel free to raise your hand or go ahead and ask those questions in the text box or go ahead and interrupt me. So 2 growth models is what we've produced in the past and will continue for anyone who needs the EA version of a 3012C metric. The first is a value-added metric, and what's that all about? That's designed to measure the contribution of educators to student growth. It compares the growth of your students to similar students, and what do we mean by similar students? It's things like English language learner status, special education status, free reduced price lunch status, the starting point, the fall score of the students, that's the most important thing, other factors like that. We also have produced a second metric for districts that needed 2 different ways to use MAP for 3012C. That's a CGI, a conditional growth index, and that aggregates NWEA's CGI metric. We've also produced that in the past and we'll continue to do that for this upcoming year for folks that need a 3012C compliant metric. Today we'll be focusing mainly on the 3012C value added metric because that's most similar to what we've proposed and gotten approved for 3012D. And then we'll also be talking about the new student learning objectives approach. Here's our website again, and in particular this is the page that has to do with the New York project that we've been producing in the past and have started to update here for the upcoming year. It has a description of how our 3012C metrics work. It has a description of how SIRS data, the Student Information Repository System data, is used in the process. It has resources for different audiences, some sample results files for 3012C, and then a timeline of events for what has been typically used in the past, The specific details of the timeline for 3012D are still pending, so we don't have hard and fast dates for that for you yet. Although I'm sure that's a very important thing that you want to take note of as soon as possible. We'll keep you updated as soon as we get more details. In particular, here are a couple of videos that we have on the site that you may find helpful. This is an introduction to value-added analysis, and then also a FAQ. These are just a couple of videos. I think they're approximately 10 to 15 minutes long each. It goes over a lot of the details of how these metrics work in case you want to take a look at that and get some more background information. In the meantime, I'm going to do a very short 5-minute perhaps introduction to how our growth metrics are designed, and then I will pause for any questions that you may have. The videos do a better job, I'm sure, than I'll be able to do right now in the moment, but just to talk about a few steps of how this works. After the spring testing is complete, our team collects student data from participating districts and then determines demographic and other adjustments. This is all in a goal in coming up with a good prediction of how a student would do compared to similar students across the state. Next, what we do is we create a customized statistical prediction for each student based on the starting point of each student, as well as a number of other characteristics such as the test window, meaning how long of time occurred between the fall and the spring test event for the student, as well as demographic characteristics like gender, ELL status, etc. Next, we compare how the student actually performed on the spring assessment compared to that predicted score, that average score for similar students. And we determine if the student exceeded or did not meet that prediction and by how much. So for example, on the student on the left here, we have a certain score in the fall and then a predicted score, meaning the average growth for similar students. In this case, the student exceeded that prediction by 5 points. So we determine if a student on their spring assessment was higher or lower than the average growth for similar students, and by how much. The student on the right, they have another customized prediction based on his or her characteristics, and in this case, the student did not meet their prediction by 4 points. So we do that for every kid in the state for which we have data, and then we link those students to their teachers based on the SIRS data that we have received. So we don't use the NWEA rosters, and I'll probably say that a few times during the presentation today. We use the SIRS data to determine which students are linked to which teachers. Then we find out on average, did the teacher's students tend to exceed or not meet their predictions by how much? And that ends up letting us know the value each teacher added to the student's growth. So in this case, teacher on the left, on average, his or her students ended up beating their average growth, their predicted growth, their similar student growth by a little over 3 points. That would be an above average value added result. And then teacher B, their students ended up not meeting average growth, not that predicted growth for similar students, on average by a little less than, or a little more than 1 point slower than average. So that would be a below average value added result. Then we have a translation that was co-decided by the Advisory Council and Education Analytics. We translate that to the 0 to 20 scale, and the one that I've shown right here is the 3012C scale. One of the main differences that happened with 3012D is there's a new translation here that's needed, and I'll go into a little bit more detail later on about how that's going to change for 3012D. So that's kind of the really quick 5-minute version of steps 1 through 5 to get us to the 3012C growth metric that we've produced in the past. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about how we go about combining data to produce that, but please enter any questions in the question session for anything you have for more clarification on how this works. There are 2 sources of data that we have used in the past and will continue to use for 3012C as well as the 3012D metrics. We have the NWEA map data, that's the test events for kids. We have small fall and spring test scores. We also have collected the CGI scores, that conditional growth index. for the second metric that has been produced for 3012C. And here's another example of me just hitting home here that we are not using the NWEA class roster files to make assignments as students to teachers. And a number of reasons for that. They were not designed for this purpose. They're not filled out in a consistent way across the state. And it's not as detailed about student-teacher relationships as the SERS data. So that's why we go ahead and collect the SERS data from typically RICs, but in some cases districts. That lets us know which are the math and the reading courses. It lets us know which teachers are linked to those math and reading courses, as well as things like teachers' instructional responsibility. It has enter and exit dates for students and teachers, lets us know about mobility events and co-teaching scenarios, and a bunch of other things that aren't captured in the NWEA class roster files. It's also the method by which we collect student demographic files and program participation. Programs meaning free or reduced price lunch status. There's a link there at the bottom, again, I think not a clickable link, but it's there on our website as well. That lets you know a little bit more about SERS data. And then an example FAQ from the materials that we have produced on our website there. Which students am I linked to, since this is the common question that we get. EA receives district student information repository system data to determine which teachers caught courses designated as math or reading or ELA based on the state course code. So those state course codes are very important for us to understand which teachers are going to get teacher level results for us. We find teachers that are linked to courses indicated that they're math or reading or ELA based on the state course code. Then we find out which students were enrolled in those courses and for how long. So here we have an example of some students that were there for the whole year, some students that were there for only part of the year. We take that into account when we're determining the effect of teachers on student growth in our growth metrics. It's going to be a little bit different when we're thinking about the SLO version in 3012D, and we'll get into that a little bit. And then just yet again, class roster files are not used in this analysis. So how exactly do we use the SERS data? It's a co-developed process that we have used with the New York Advisory Council on how exactly to use those data. We've met with RICs, had some meetings with the state even to talk about the meaning of those different fields and the best way to use those for a growth metric. If you're interested in more details about that, I can certainly answer any questions that you might have when we get to the question and answer session about it. We also have the handbook that we have produced in the past to give a little insight there on our website, so you can go ahead and check that out. But we'd of course be interested in answering any of the questions you may have about that. So here I'm going to pause for any questions about 3012C. In particular, this is really focused on folks that have used our education analytics metric in the past and might continue to want to use it in the future. So any questions about 3012C before I get into some of the changes and the new metrics for 3012D? I think it looks like I'm picking up a little bit from Jill, but I wasn't sure if that was a question. Any questions?
No.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and proceed to 3012D. So here are a few highlights of things that we think are very important. There may be more, and if there are any others that you think are really important for us to consider along the way, please do let us know. As I mentioned in 3012C, this is a co-build process that we've really taken district feedback into account on how we've produced our metrics. So if there's an important aspect of this that you want to make sure that we consider for the metrics that we'll be producing in the upcoming summer and then into the future, please do let us know if you think that we've missed something. So some of the major ones, though, are that the state approves combined approaches for the assessment in the growth metrics now in 3012D. So in this case, that means that NWEA and EA made a joint submission to the state for the use of the MAP assessment in grades K through 10 in math, reading, and language usage. And then in addition to that, we also had to get a particular metric approved that we would be using with that assessment. So in that case, we have both a growth metric, growth model, and a student learning objective approach. I'll be talking about how those are going to be working for the upcoming year for anybody that wants to use the 3012D metrics. Another highlighted change here is that there's a new 0 to 20 APPR cut point range, and we'll be explaining how that is changing in the upcoming year for anybody that's used us in the past. And then also, as I mentioned a little bit, the language usage assessment is now going to be on the approved list, and we'll be producing metrics for that. In the past, our team has only produced math and reading, but now we're going to be adding that language usage assessment. So first I'm going to talk about the growth model approach, and then after that, next I'm going to be talking about student learning objectives. So first off, the growth model and the similarities to what we produced in the past. So if you think back to that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 step process that I showed about the 3012C value added metric, that's very similar to what we've had approved by the state for the growth model for 3012D. They both are going to be using the SIRS data to identify rosters and courses, linking students to teachers together to let us know which teachers are going to be receiving results. It's going to have adjustments for student demographic characteristics. It's going to be reflective of the average effect of educators on student growth. It's going to take into account the degree to which students grew faster or slower than peers. It's not necessarily, or it's not just a yes or no, did a student grow faster or slower than average? It takes into degree, did they meet or exceed by a large margin or not meet by a large margin. So not only is it did a student meet or not meet, the degree to which they did or did not is taken into account. The list goes on, mostly the same to what has been produced in the past. But what is different? There's a new 0 to 20 translation. I'll show you what that looks like, and the inclusion of language usage assessment in our results. Let's talk about this scale change. Up on the top here, I have the 3012C scale that has been used in the past. So we had this distribution, which you are probably familiar with. The new scale in 3012D has really shifted quite a bit. So you can see how large that ineffective range has become on the 0 to 20 scale. So the main thing that we've done is in the past, the Advisory Council has jointly determined with us that the average teacher should end up in the middle of the effective range based on the 3012C scale. That's what we've produced in the past. Now, keeping that in mind and that sort of mantra, we've produced a new translation that puts the average teacher in the middle of the new effective range. And again, in keeping with the idea that very few teachers should be down in the ineffective range, we've done the same thing as well in the new translation. So for anybody that likes z-scores, and you can look at this closer, this is maybe incomprehensible, I'm not sure, but basically it shows you that the vast majority of teachers in the past and in the 3012D metric are going to end up in the effective range based on the way that we've changed the translation scale. So the idea that most teachers are going to be in the effective range is going to continue on, and the same idea that very few teachers are going to be in the ineffective range also holds true. So we tried to keep the spirit of what the Advisory Council has decided in the past based on the limitations and the constraints of how the 3012D translation scale is predefined by the state. So that was a quick introduction to the 3012D growth metric. Any questions or comments about that before I talk about the SLO approach?
Are we correct in looking at that chart to understand that there could be negative growth and still within the effective range?
Negative growth in the effective growth. So negative would mean the students grew a little bit slower than average for similar students, and that would be if that happened on average. So for example, a teacher that might have gotten a 15 here, that would mean, and I don't think you can see the mouse because I have kind of the clean version here, but if over on the right side in 3012D, students could grow a little bit slower than similar students, and the teacher would still be in the effective range. That's what that means, yes.
Thank you.
No problem. Any other, let's see, another question I have here. Can you send us the PowerPoint? Yes, we can make this available in a PDF form on our website, and then there also will be this recording that you can go back to later. I see another question here. What is the purpose of the shift in scale? So there's one shift in scale here, which is kind of this color-coded thing. The highly effective, effective, developing, ineffective. Actually, I'll go back to this. So the color-coded part here, that's something that the state decided that they wanted to do. I don't know all the motivations behind why they wanted to make the ineffective range as large as it is right now. Part of this, I think, parallels the idea that the component metrics are going to be more consistent with the overall 0 to 100 translation that had been produced in the past. So if you look back at the 0 to 100 version, it had, and I might get this wrong, but something like 0 to 60 was ineffective on the 0 to 100 scale. So the new 3012D scale kind of parallels that idea that a large proportion of the scale is in the ineffective range. So in response to that change by the state that the ineffective range is so large, and by the way, in the request for solutions, the state mandated that the distribution of scores mimic what the state's growth metric was going to produce, and they let us know in that proposal approximately what percentage of teachers and schools might fall within these ranges. So given that information, that's how we came up with how these new z-score cut points would need to be altered in order to meet all those requirements. So please type in the question box or let me know verbally if that helped with that question.
Can you take another question?
Please do, yes.
Have you thrown in last year's scores into your new metrics, into the 3012D schedule to see how teachers came out in a district?
Yes, and that's how we determined how these z-scores should be set. We used the information from the past analysis in prior years to determine how these cut points should be to match up with roughly the same distribution of the Heidi rather than the 0 to 20 to come with this new translation.
So if we requested that for our district to get it all, so we could see with the new cut scores, how our teachers would have fared, you could send that to us?
You mean, for example, for last year, if a teacher got a 17, let's say, what would that teacher get based on last year's outcomes under the new 3012D regime? Like, would it be a 17 again, or would it be something else? Is that the question?
Yes.
That's a really good question. I'm going to write that down and see what we can do about that. I think our intention in general was for the upcoming year that for folks that had done 3012C with us before, if you wanted that again, we'd give you both 3012C and 3012D. But I think that's a good idea to see if we could give our prior partners a kind of a preview of how 3012D might have worked. We'll look through the logistics of what it would take to do that and then get back to you on it.
Yeah, because moving forward, it doesn't help to have 3012C and 3012D data if you can only use 3012D data, correct?
We use that we look for the sake of negotiations, so that during we're still in the process of negotiating this, so that we can negotiate and show both sides that it would more or less come out the same way on our data set.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I see the motivation. So, and that sounds like a good use of these data. So we will take that to our team, see what we can do, and then we'll be in contact with the group that of approximately 50 districts that have used the 3012C metrics with us before, in case that's helpful for them. Let's see, any other questions or comments? And Amanda, you're reminding me that the distribution is in the RFQ on the NYSED website. So if anyone wants to take a look at the kind of the requirements that we used as the basis for determining how these cut points were going to take place, that's available on the NYSED website. So I'll go ahead and proceed with the SLO approach, and then again, I'll ask for questions. I'll talk a little bit about logistics, and then we'll pause at the end. Again, hopefully we'll have plenty of time there for any other questions or clarifications folks might have. So we'll start by just kind of talking about key differences there. So what I've just gotten done talking about was the 3012C and 3012D growth metric. And now new this year, something we haven't produced in the past is an SLO approach. So I've taken a shot at just a few high-level things just to give you a sense of what are some big differences. There's others that, but this is just a start here. So first off here, what are we talking about? Comparing the growth of the student to, in the growth model, it's the growth of similar students. It takes into account the starting point of the students, the demographic characteristics, those sort of things. In SLO, it's comparing the growth of the student to a predefined target. In our case, that takes into account essentially the starting point of the student as well as the standard error associated with it. We'll get into a little bit more detail about that shortly. Next line takes into account in the growth model the degree to which a student met or did not meet typical growth. And in the SLO approach, it's just a yes or no, did the student meet or not meet the target? And then the 0 to 20 is based on, in the growth model, the average effect of the educator on student growth. So we are trying to isolate what it is that the educator is doing to contribute to student growth. And then we find out on average, how was a teacher's group of students growing compared to similar students, and that's how we make that 0 to 20 translation. That's where that Z-scale chart came from the other slide. In the SLO approach, it's about the 0 to 20 is based on the percentage of students that met the target. So visually, I'm going to go over these differences again in kind of a different way. On the left, we have the growth model. So we start off with a predicted score for the students. That's an apples to apples comparison of how similar students from across the state performed on the spring assessment. That takes into account the starting point of the kids, the demographics of the kids, the test window of the kids, all those sort of things. We get a predicted score for that student. Then we find out how did the student actually perform at the end of the year, and then we find out if the student exceeded or did not meet that prediction, that average growth, and by how much. In the SLO approach, there's a target set at the beginning of the year, and then there's an actual score for the student, and then if the student was higher than that, they met, or conversely, they could not meet if they were below. Continuing on with this kind of differences approach here, in the left on the growth model, we look at each student and find out the degree to which they beat or did not meet those average growth predictions and by how much, and then we average that together. So you get more credit for a student that really beat their average growth, or on the other hand, you'd get quite a bit of a penalty if a student was nowhere near the average growth for similar students, so it takes into account that magnitude. On the other hand, with SLO, it's just a yes or no, met or not met for each student based on those predetermined targets. So what is that? What's the target that I mentioned earlier? What is that magical number here? So the state set up a system in which the targets were defined in writing as a year of growth, and then it also came up with a chart for the percentage of students meeting those targets and how the Heidi ratings would be for teachers. So that put us in a situation that it's kind of like a rock and a hard place, or how do you come up with a good, defensible, accurate, but yet attainable goal for students that ends up with a reasonable Heidi translation. So again, we went back to last year's results for 3012C, went through that and saw how it would shake out with different growth targets for students to find out what seems to be the spirit of the law, but also gets at a fair distribution for teachers. What are those targets? What should they be? So our approved plan uses the national growth norms, but it doesn't just mean the target is the growth norm. It also takes into account the standard error of growth in considering when determining whether a student met the target or not. And it's, I think it's something like 1.6 standard errors is what we take into account when determining if a student met the target or not. For folks that are kind of visual here, why are we considering the standard error of growth? Let's say that we didn't consider the standard error of growth and we said a year of growth as the state said needs to be the target. What if we just said it's the growth norm, national growth norm period? What would happen? Looking back at data from prior years as well as consulting with NWEA, it turns out that the average teacher would be somewhere maybe 11, 12, somewhere in that range, where in a typical classroom, approximately 50 or 60% of the students in a classroom might meet the national growth norms. So if we said NWEA growth norm was the target, and here's the state mandated translation scale of percentages to APPR scores, that means the average teacher would get about an 11 or a 12. And that did not seem appropriate based on our prior meetings with the advisory council of how we think the effective categories should be distributed. So we looked at how could we use the standard error of measure that is also produced and shown to you in the reports that NWEA provides. If we use that metric, it'll end up be that the average teacher is somewhere approximately in the middle of the effective range, which really checks the boxes of how we thought that this metric should work. So the way that this will work is that you can still consider for students the growth target to be the national growth norm that you can see in the reports that you have. But when Education Analytics, our team provides you at the end of the year in August, the results of the SLO analysis, we'll be considering the standard error of measure around those measurements when we're giving you the APPR translations for teachers. So that's kind of just a quick preview here of how the SLO process works. We'll continue to have more details along the way. I believe there's a guidance document with some more details coming from NWEA that will have some more in-depth details there. But I'll pause again for any questions or comments about what I've shared so far about the SLO approach. Next thing we'll be doing is talking about a little bit more about the logistics that we know so far for obtaining results. Let's see, not much so far. So is that maybe that's a good sign, maybe that's a bad sign. How are we feeling about this so far? Is this making sense so far? Is this checking some boxes of what you wanted to know about these approaches coming up?
Yes.
All right, excellent. I'll take that as good feedback there. We'll continue on to some more logistics here. So the first step here for obtaining results is a little bit, we don't have the details yet for you today, but the first thing is going to be a sign-up phase. My understanding is that districts are currently finding out if they're going to be using 3012C or 3012D or what the different translations are going to be. There's negotiations taking place. So on our end, some of it's up on the air, and my understanding is at your districts, a lot of this is up in the air as well. Some folks may be farther along than others. We'll be getting you information about how to sign up to let us know at Education Analytics and NWEA what your district needs so that we make sure that we get you the right stuff when it comes to this upcoming summer. So I'm sorry you don't have all the details yet, but we'll be in touch as soon as you learn more. The next thing that's going to happen is that either, and this is part of why we don't have as much of the timeline in place yet, is either the state or RICs or districts is going to be the source of information for SIRS data that our team is going to need to produce both the 3012C and the 3012D metrics, the growth model and the SLO version of this. We are thinking about our strategy in which we're going to be approaching the state or RICs. We may actually end up asking districts for your help to make sure that we can make sure that stakeholders are with us in our messaging of how important and helpful and efficient it could be to collect those data from the state or RICs. We've had good success in the past contacting a number of RICs to collect those data, and we're hoping to continue that relationship in the upcoming strategy for 3012C and D. We also have additional data that comes from NWEA, the MAP scores. The third piece of the puzzle here from districts is the expected teachers templates. And this is a step that I'll be talking about a little bit more in depth in a bit. The punchline there, though, is that this is a chance for your district to let our team know at Education Analytics for which teachers you are expecting to receive growth results from us. That lets us know when we're doing our preliminary results if we're getting the right results for you. The worst thing that can happen here is that you're expecting a result for a teacher and then it's time for the APPR scores to be submitted and we don't have the result for you for whatever reason. So this expected teachers template is highly recommended for you to fill out to make sure that when we're going through this process that we make sure we get you all the teachers that you need. I see a question came in. Let me take a look here. Excellent. So another question came in about the idea of some of these new translation scales and how districts and their performance last year might have fallen or might have, I didn't mean go down, I meant how it might have shaken out in the new 3012D regime. So we'll be thinking about that, our notes that we'll take for both the growth metric and the SLO approach. We'll see what we can do there and get back to you to give you some more previews about how that might work. So after our team receives those three different sources of information, SIRS data, MAP scores, and the expected teachers templates, at that point our team can go ahead and produce a preliminary set of results. Historically, that's been available in late July for school districts. And the major driving force for that is we have the SIRS data needs to be collected from RICs and districts, and we have typically used the files that have a June 30th date for the finalization. We want to make sure that we get as many changes and corrections that your districts have worked so hard to enter to make sure that the SIRS data is accurate. We want to use the most up-to-date, the most accurate version of that, as well as making sure that the MAP test window is all closed, all those scores get in, and then we collect those from NWEA. So those are the main driving forces for making that late July timeline. We'll get back to you as we learn more about how we might be able to make that happen any quicker in the new 3012D version of it. One thing that might really help is if we can collect SIRS data from the state. That would be a tremendous lifting of a burden for everybody involved if we could collect that from the state. We're thinking about a strategy of how we might be able to accomplish that. Then there's an embargo period. That's our way of saying we gave you preliminary results for you to look at, take a close look to see are there any gaps in coverage, does anything need to be investigated before EA does the final results run, because once we do the final results we don't want to make any more changes. That's the way that those are the final results that have our stamp on them. So during this embargo period, typically a couple of weeks, districts have a chance to look at those preliminary results and then give us any feedback about any gaps that you see, anything that looks odd about the links for students and teachers, how many kids are in classrooms. You're missing these teachers that were in AIS courses that actually there was reading instruction happening there. So you need to include those teachers. We could go back and forth and make any of those corrections that we would need to make so that when we give you the final results, those are available on typically mid-August is what we've produced in the past, and I know that's a tight timeline for the time that those are due for APPR to the state. That's typically been the fastest that we've been able to do it. We'll give you updates along the way as we go. I see another question that came in about will we receive both the growth and the SLO scores. I'll show you in a moment about what types of results that we'll be providing under the 3012C and the 3012D different versions of it, because there's a lot of detail there, and I'll show you that in just a little bit. I promised I'd let you know a little bit more about the expected teachers templates. I have a really small screenshot here just as like a visual key. Please don't try to read the 2-point font or whatever that is in that image, just as a visual for anybody that's seen this as a past and a reminder. This is a chance for you to tell us which teachers should be getting results in your district. It can help us with quality control. We will send along diagnostic files along with the preliminary results so we can work together with your team to track down any data issues, things like missing test scores for students, or perhaps a teacher was missing from the course file. Those sort of things, we can, in those couple of weeks of time, we can make corrections to that to make sure we can get you as many teachers and students coverage as are possible. We'll be sending out a template to your district contact for completion in the spring so that you can take a look at that, fill that out, and then get it back to us. Results files. This is about where I'm going to show you what kind of results you could expect to receive. So just a preview, typically we've produced just kind of spreadsheet files to let you sort, divide up easily how you might want to distribute those to teachers and schools. We'll be continuing on with that. This is just a preview. There's more detail in the files that we provide to you, but just as a kind of a level setting here, there's typically one row per teacher in the teacher results that we have. We give you the number of students that were linked to the teacher to determine those results, and then a 0 to 20 APPR score is given there as well. We deliver those by our secure portal. We have one file per result type, and they're distributed by districts to educators and the state. So what we do at EA, we just give that to our district contact at your team, and then it's up to you to determine who gets to see that in terms of teachers and schools and which results you choose to submit to the state. So we don't submit any results to the state. We don't produce anything that goes to the state in terms of results. That's up to your team to determine how you're going to go about doing that and integrating it into your systems. I had a question earlier about what results are provided. For any of the approximately 50 districts that have used us in the past, you'll remember potentially our two names here. We had a standard package and a deluxe package. Those came as feedback as districts wanted to have more metrics from us in terms of using MAP in a couple of different ways for 3012C, as well as thinking about getting school level metrics. This is just a kind of a reminder of what's been produced in the past for districts that have purchased the standard or the deluxe package from us, and this is what we'll continue to be doing for anybody that needs the 3012C metrics in the upcoming year. Everything is going to stay the same. So if you've negotiated those 3012C metrics and need those again, we'll continue on with that plan so that we won't change anything for you if you want that again. The new version of this is that we've eliminated the idea that you have to pick one or the other. This is just, we're going to produce this for anybody that signs up for needing 3012D. We're going to be giving everybody the growth metrics and the SLO version of this for anybody that goes through the process of signing up to letting us know that you need 3012D metrics. We have teacher level results for you. We have grade level team results for you, and we'll be producing school level results for you. We'll have them for all the subjects combined, math, reading, and language usage. We'll also do subject specific ones, and then we'll do a reading and language usage combined. This is based on some feedback we had from NWEA, as well as a few districts that have reached out to us about what they thought would be useful and necessary for 3012D. I also have an asterisk that really parallels the one that I had on the previous slide, which is in order for teachers to receive a teacher level result, meaning let's say Miss Smith is a teacher in your district, will you receive a result for Miss Smith? We'll only be doing that for teachers for which we can link courses based on the SERS state course codes to courses of mathematics, reading, or language usage based on the state course codes. So that's courses that begin with a 1 or a 2 if it's a 4-digit code, or if it's a 5-digit codes, courses that begin with a 5-2 or a 5-1. Those are the courses that we've designated with the help of RICS and the Advisory Council to determine which are the math and the reading or language usage courses. So that's a really important thing for everybody to realize, that for the growth metrics and the SLO results. We'll only be producing teacher level metrics for the teachers that are directly linked to teaching those specific courses. That's in line with the recommendation and decisions of the advisory council in the past. We'll be continuing on with that. We'll also be producing those grade level results in case you wanted to use those for any other purposes besides the teacher specific metric. And then we have the school results as well. Timeline of events. The bad news is that this is still pending, so we don't have the specific dates for you. But as a preview, just to get a sense of this, I'll leave this up a little bit here. This is the timeline that we had for the previous year that I'll leave up for you to see for just a bit, and I'll look here for questions. Okay, I see one came in about the course numbers. So I'll repeat verbally, but then just in case you want to take a really close look at that, because it is quite important to get this right. On our website at analytics.org, if you go to the New York NWEA APPR project, there's a page that we have that says who's eligible, and you can download the SIRS manual. That has much more detail than I'm about to describe right now if you want to make sure that you get that right in your SIRS system. So just a tip to go there for the really in-depth version of it. But I'll repeat again the course numbers. If it's a 4-digit code, it has to start with either a 1 or a 2. So for example, if we see a course code that says 2400, we'll count that as a course. And I forget. Joe, can you remind me, do you remember if 2 is math or if it's ELA or reading?
I don't remember.
All right, we have the code that does it right, but that might be math, let's say. I might have gotten that wrong, but let's say that's math. So we'll count that as a course that's designated as math for teachers linked there. So if it's a 4-digit code, starts with 1 or starts with 2. If it's a 5-digit code, it has to start with 51 or 52. So for example, if it says 52400, we would count that as a course that is linked to either math or reading. And I apologize, I can't remember if it's either if it's one or the other. But that will be the determination that we've used for the past 4 years, and we'll be using again in the future to determine which are the teachers of primarily math or reading courses. The main spots where we've had some issues with that is where there might be some support teachers or other teachers that are really teaching, let's say, reading, but they don't have a course that's labeled as such in the SIRS data that your teams are submitting to the state. Those are things that you could either tell us ahead of time. You could let us know which courses you want to count for math or reading instruction, or in the embargo period when we'll be giving you preliminary results. If you see some teachers that are missing, we can help you track down where those courses might be, that you make sure you want to include those. But what we don't want to promote is the use of, let's say, the NWEA MAP assessment to evaluate a science teacher. Is not something that we are supporting in our metrics here. So we've gotten some feedback from folks about needing to have alternatives with that. But right now what we're supporting is the direct linkages to fall in line with the advisory council's feedback to us from the past. So that's the end of my kind of the content that I have. I have some resources as well down at the bottom that we can go to in case some various things come up. For anybody that's seen the oak tree analogy, I have that in my back pocket in case for whatever reason someone wants to see that again. That's one of the videos that we have on our website for anybody that wants to know more about growth metrics. We don't have an SLO version of that yet, but if you want to learn more about the growth metrics, we have that up there as well. So here's time for question and answers, and then a few ideas here of some topics that you might have questions about. But anything else, feel free to type something into the question box or go ahead and say your question aloud. I'll try to make sure everybody's unmuted. So I will go ahead and stick around for several more minutes, as long as we need for this 90-minute presentation here, in case anybody has any additional questions. But that's the end of the content, and I really appreciate that you all took the time to come here to learn more about what we're continuing to do for 3012C and what we've gotten approved by the state for 3012D. If you have any questions, please stick around and I'll go ahead and answer those. But just want to say thank you for everybody for joining us, and I'll be here in case anybody has any additional comments or questions. But thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Sean.
Very welcome.
Thank you.
Bye. Great. I see. Let's see. Kind of one comment that's coming in about you may think more questions along the way as you're sharing this with the team. Of course, this is all, especially the 3012D stuff, is new to all of us. So if you have any questions that come up later, please don't hesitate to contact us about this. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.